Hey everybody, standing among the gnats here at Tanya Creek Park in Atlanta. Finally, we have crossed the Chattahoochee and we have made it to Atlanta, and we are happy to be able to show you at least what remains of some of these sites. And I think that you can have a meaningful experience even as you get closer into the city of Atlanta. I'm Garry Adelman, the American Battlefield Trust. That is Chris White behind the camera. We got a couple of guests with us today, the first of which we'll launch right into here. Chris Mackowski, emerging Civil War, to bring the troops here.
And Garry said we've made it across the Chattahoochee and we're happy, and so is William T. Sherman and his Army group. Joe Johnston is not, and neither is anybody else in the Confederacy. When we left Kennesaw Mountain, looking at some of our earlier videos, you know that the Federals had a lot of trouble assaulting that line, except on the far Federal right, Schofield has some success against Hood, which dislodges him just a little bit, and that is going to make Hood's left flank against Nickajack Creek insecure, and that's going to allow McPherson to maneuver down around and again shifting around the Confederate line to the right, as we've been doing all campaign, and that's going to force Johnston to pull up and abandon his Kennesaw line and back up about 7 miles to a line centered around Smyrna. On his right, he's going to have his line anchored on Rosewood Creek. It's going to extend about 6 miles down to again anchor on Nickajack Creek. He's going to have Hood, Hardee, Loring, and he's going to invite Sherman to move down and attack him. Probably the most significant casualty in this whole thing, Thomas Hinman, riding a horse, hits his head, gets his face hit with some branches, hurts his eye. It's going to knock him out. But other than that, it's going to be a sit and wait. And again, Sherman's going to advance, and this time it's going to be Schofield that's going to make the run around the right, and it's going to dislodge Johnston, and Johnston's going to have to fall back again, finally to his final line right against the Chattahoochee. Now, Johnston knew this was coming. In fact, when he's still on top of Kennesaw, he says he's going to have to give up this whole line. One of his engineers, Brigadier General Francis Shoup, is mortified by this idea, and he says, well, I've got an idea. And he's actually going to go back to the Chattahoochee and create this final line that Johnston's eventually going to fall back into. And it's going to be pretty novel in its construction. It's going to anchor on the Chattahoochee on both ends, and it's going to consist not just of earthworks, but of fortified stockade-style earthworks. So we've got built-up log walls, and punctuated in about 36 places are these battlements that are going to become known as Shoupidades. They're arrowhead-shaped fortifications with walls about 16 feet high, and they're built in order to invite attack, creating enfilading fields of fire. So if Sherman were to advance toward these Shoupidades, the Confederates, with 80 men in each one, are going to be able to then pour down this enfilading fire. So it's an incredibly strong position, but the Confederates themselves have never been in anything like it. So when they finally start moving in there on July 4th and 5th, they don't know what they're looking at. Some of the men start actually disassembling some of these fortifications. Pat Claiborne, among the officers, like, no, this is fantastic. Johnston sees it. He orders everything reconstructed that some of those infantrymen start to tear down. But Johnston's already looking to the far side of the river. He's going to construct pontoon trains that are going to stretch from his side of the river to the far side. 2 pontoons per corps, a total of 6 corps, and he's going to wait for Sherman to come at him again. At this point, though, he's feeling so confident, he has already sent word to Jefferson Davis saying that he can hold this line for a month. He's feeling fantastic. But on the evening of the 6th, he's actually going to make his headquarters on the south bank of the river, because he's already knowing maybe things aren't going to work out here so well. So Sherman is going to advance, he's going to probe, and here's where he pulls the biggest head fake of the whole campaign. Remember, we've talked constantly about how he keeps going to his right, going around the Confederate left. And here he's going to look like he's going to do it again, but instead he's going to send Schofield to the north, upriver to the left, and fake out that direction. There's going to be actually a regiment of Federals that's going to row across the Chattahoochee, establish a beachhead, scare away just the very, very small bit of Confederate resistance that they get. Other troops are going to actually find a fish dam and walk across the river up at Isham's Ford, and that's where the Federals are going to get across, Jacob Cox's men, and now suddenly Johnston realized outflanked. He said he could hold this line for a month. Yeah, he finds out that the Federals are crossing July 8th. So by the 9th, he's going to have to start to pull back and evacuate this strong position. And that is going to be the death knell of Joe Johnston. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But word's going to finally reach Jefferson Davis, and he says that he can't imagine what's going to happen now. This is just terrible, terrible. And just one final note, William T. Sherman can't believe it either. He says, I can't believe a general as skilled as Johnson would hold up a defense with a river to his back like that. Can't believe it. But Sherman pulls that head fake and makes everything work out just fine.
That's great, man. And Chris Mackowski's getting into it just for campaign movements, man. He's getting all excited. I guess I'm not one to talk. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on the Peachtree Creek battlefield. And before we can talk about the Battle of Peachtree Creek, there is an elephant in the room. And Chris sort of alluded to it a little bit. And by the way, I agree with Jefferson Davis. Oh, my God, what might happen now that the Federals have crossed the Chattahoochee? So it's a valid concern. And to talk about that, we're going to bring up just a great preservationist, one of our really good friends. He is President Emeritus of the Georgia Battlefield Association and partly responsible for the preservation in part of most of the battlefields we visit on this trip. Come on up, Charlie Crawford.
We're in Tanner Creek Park, which is about in the middle of the Peachtree Creek battlefield, though it doesn't look much like it. You can probably see behind me the residences that are here. There's also a lot of apartment houses, commercial establishments, and a huge hospital complex, and even an interstate highway. So this is a battlefield that the Civil War Sites Advisory Commission adjudged was lost. And it is, but you can still come here because some of the plaques and the markers will give you an idea of what happened here, although we wish we had more open land to show you. The important context for the Battle of Peachtree Creek, 20 July 1864, is the firing of Joe Johnston. Davis had finally had enough, sent a message on the evening of the 17th of July. The transfer actually occurred on the 18th of July. And so there was a lot of people that loved Johnson, a lot of people still supported him, but even contemporaneously, that is not in the wake of knowing what happened after Hood took over, people were already questioning the fact that the Army had done nothing but retreat for the 10 weeks of the campaign so far. And so it's not like there was all this universal horror that Johnston had been fired. There was, however, a considerable amount of uncertainty that the selection of Hood precipitated. A lot of people didn't know much about Hood. He had been a corps commander in this army for less than 6 months. He had come from Northern Virginia for the most part, and he was accustomed to dealing with Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. But the Army of Tennessee had a different war experience. They'd had only one great victory, and they'd managed to fritter that away by their commanders quarreling with each other, and 2 months later suffered a massive defeat. So the appointment of Hood raised some uncertainty. There was people who were in favor of it because they thought Johnston did need to be replaced. There were others that thought, who is this guy, and what's he going to do with us? Hood had to fight with the army he was handed, so to speak, and he knew he had been put in charge precisely because he was expected to do something, which Johnston had trouble doing. And so Hood thought the best morale boost for this army and the best way to make it more effective is to present them with a victory. That is, attack, and if we're successful, they'll feel much better about the whole thing. So he came up with a plan. And it was what in the French would call en echelon. Remember Napoleon's influence on military terminology at this point. And it was going to come from their right. I have my back to the Federals, and I'm looking at the Confederate positions. It would come from the Confederate right to Confederate left in sequence. And Hardee's Corps was going to be on the right. Stuart's Corps was going to be on the left. And the theory, or the plan was, the 1st Division would hit on the far eastern end, and as it began to have some success, then the 2nd Division would follow on so that nobody could reinforce the under siege Federals from farther along the line. And that would continue all the way along through 7 divisions, 4 of Hardee's Corps and 3 of Stuart's Corps, from east to west. It didn't work out that way, in part because the lead division under General Bate wound up on the wrong side of Clear Creek and just walked around in the swampy land for a couple hours and had almost no effect on the battle. The first division that really did hit was General William H.T. Walker's division, and they got a rude reception only to find that Newton's Federal Division had already had time to erect some preliminary breastworks right across what's now Peachtree Road at the end of the road that's behind me, Collier Road. And so Walker's division had a hard time of it. The next division in line was Maney, and he didn't even close on the Federals, and you can tell that basically from the casualty reports. Earl Hess describes them as essentially having gone to ground. They saw what was ahead of them and decided they didn't need to press the attack. Cleburne's division had already been held back. He was supposed to be the guy that exploited wherever the breakthrough occurred. So Cleburne's division was not involved either. Next, after Maney, then you start running into Stuart's divisions. And on the right would be Loring, right being this way, even though I'm pointing with my left hand. And then would come Walthall, and then on the far left would be French. Loring and Walthall did make the attack. French also went to ground. So instead of having 7 divisions attack 4, which was the plan, you actually wound up with 7 brigades attacking 4, because you had the 3 brigades of Walker's division, and Loring and Walthall and French were all missing one of their 3 brigades who had been detailed to protect the Confederate left rear from another crossing of the Chattahoochee River. So you wind up with 7 brigades attacking 4 divisions. Even so, there was a gap in the Federal line between Newton's division and Geary's division. The left of Geary's division would have been behind me, about up where this White House is on the hill. And then they would go over and they would actually have the right flank a bit in the air, because Williams' division to their right had its left flank behind Geary's right. So the 2 sort of partial successes was where Featherston almost hits the gap in the Federal line. But Harrison, Coburn, and Wood were the 3 brigade commanders for General Ward's division. Ward's division had crossed Peachtree Creek last, and they were actually eating lunch in the low fields right beyond south of the bridge over Peachtree Creek. But they had put regiments to picket Collier Road, this higher ground behind me, and so when they noticed the Confederates approaching directly toward me from their line, they rushed back and said to General Ward, we need to, get up onto the Collier Road line as fast as possible. Now, you love these little controversies that occur when people either misremember or intentionally don't remember correctly what happened. But Harrison, Coburn, and Wood, the 3 brigade commanders, essentially said they did this on their own because Ward was prone to drink, and some of them either ungraciously or accurately characterized Ward as being under the influence. He will later take credit for his division having rushed forward. On the other hand, for whatever reason, Harrison would be immediately behind me to the left, then Coburn, then Wood, did come up to the Collier Road line. And it's one of the few instances I can think of in the Civil War where the 2 forces were actually charging toward each other when they met. Normally somebody's in place and somebody else is attacking. Ward's division was coming hell-bent for leather south, and Loring's division was coming hell-bent for leather north, and they met at Redland Road. In any event, the Confederates were unable to exploit the gap. Walthall's division had some success. He broke the right of Geary's division, and then tried to get past the ravine, which is behind us to the right by a few hundred yards. He was unsuccessful in doing so. He did cause quite a bit of consternation among the Federal commanders, but in the end, after 2 hours of rather desperate scrambling to repair the line, the U.S. Army was victorious. And General Sherman was not aware of all this. This is General Thomas's victory. He was the one that was in charge of the Army of the Cumberland, and it was part of 2 of his corps that were present, the 20th Army Corps and the 4th Army Corps, and then a little bit of the 14th Army Corps. The way that Albert Castell summarized this up is where the Confederates had superior numbers, they didn't fight well, and where they fought well, they didn't have superior numbers. In any event, by about 6 o'clock on the afternoon of July the 20th, the Confederates had been repulsed. The U.S. Army was victorious. About, as near as we can tell, 2,600 Confederate casualties, about 2,000 Federal casualties, and that's the end of the Battle of Peachtree Creek.
Thanks so much, Charlie. A couple of things. First of all, here's yet another battle that, had it been fought 2 years earlier, would have been the bloodiest or most costly battle in all of American history. But so much had the Civil War changed our sort of reconciliation of what a massive battle is that, it's hard to even keep track of these things. I also want to thank Charlie for his great act of restraint, because I've spent the better part of a whole day doing Peachtree Creek with Charlie. He's got a lot more to say, so thanks for summarizing in that way, Charlie. I got a couple of things to say. If you look at this map, it makes it look painfully, and this is what we have to do when we make maps, like the Confederate, divisions all advanced. They all advanced at once, and the Union stood there with the exception of one sort of counterattack, and that was that, okay? And even as Charlie described, there's a whole lot more to it. You have commanders making decisions on the ground. You have, everything happening that is happening during a battle. You have refusals, you have gaps being plugged, you have things going on in the rear, and all of that gets lost when you reduce a battle down to one map, let alone one 20-minute video. So, this is the nature of these things. Not everybody wants an 8-hour video on the Battle of Peachtree Creek, so we have to do the best we can. One thing I learned from Charlie a couple years back was that for some reason, because of a battery was out there, one regiment, a New Jersey regiment, the 33rd, probably off to my over left shoulder, I'm reluctant to say it, it's over there, way in front of the rest of the Union line. 33rd New Jersey's there in front of Geary's troops, and here comes Scott and Featherston. We have good accounts from them. They talked about the enemy showing up, all of a sudden coming in upon their rear. They tried to refuse their flank, and it's going to do no good. They're going to get swallowed up at that point. And this is just one regiment of so many regiments that were in this battle. So, you can read a lot more about this, and I think you should. But we're going to leave it at that in terms of the battle stuff. But I did want to bring on Chris Mackowski again. So, it was going to be 7 divisions against 4. Sounds like a decent plan. Chris, was this a good plan, really just fettered by poor execution?
Well, Hood's got 2 things he's considering here. First of all, his predecessor got fired for not doing anything. So what does he have to do? Something, anything. And he's got the mindset that his good friend Jefferson Davis wants, and that's the offense. I have a fabulous book. I'm going to preview this. Gary's going to have this for us later on today. So that's the first thing in Hood's mind. Second, is that he's got an isolated part of the Federal Army group that is south of Peachtree Creek. One thing we really haven't talked about is it takes Sherman a couple days to get across the Chattahoochee, and then when he does, he gives his men a couple weeks to catch their breath, which allows this fantastic political drama on the Confederate side to unfold with the Confederate High Command. And so as Sherman gets across the river, his men are spread out. They're kind of getting ready for the next part of the phase, but they're not quite ready to advance. And that's why Thomas's section of the army is kind of sitting there looking tantalizing. Hood sees it, he knows he's got to do something, and boom. So on paper, it's probably the best that Hood can do. And so it's well conceived and poorly executed. But it's the best of a lot of diminishing options at this point for Hood. Now, it's one thing we didn't really talk about is like Johnson at this point, just before he was relieved, he's thinking, there's nothing I can do. We really need a cavalry raid conducted by people not associated with his army to cut Sherman's supply lines way off in the rear. That's his golden hope that he was hoping to have happen. And it's not happening and not happen, and he doesn't really have a plan B. So when Hood inherits the army, and in fact they even ask for delay so that they have the chance to confer, and Jefferson Davis says no, no, no. And so that's why Hood takes command, looks at his options, and this is the best that he can do.
Good. One thing that we don't need to fail to mention
and I'm
is
going to say we're going to watch out for the landmine that is right here behind Gary.
Oh my God, there is. I thought it was going to be an fire ant set, but it's not. I wanted to say how great the trust is. I don't like to brag, but we are so good at attracting lawnmowers wherever we shoot that we thought we would point that out. Man, it was nice and peaceful here for a little bit, but we're wrapping things up. I wanted to show we don't have a whole lot of visual evidence, not as much as we'd like, of any of these Atlanta campaign battles, but when we do have one, that is just great. You can see some of the gravestones over there, or the temporary headboards that were there. Charlie Crawford tells me you can zoom in and read one of the names. What's that?
Captain C. Siemens
it's
of Wisconsin.
So he's 26 Wisconsin, and that helped to determine the location. See, we can use these photographs as primary documents, as rich in information as any other primary document we have to understand our history a little bit better. So even coming here and reading the plaques at that old sort of pocket park there, we saw one at Ringgold. We've been passing them the whole time while we go. You can get a good understanding on their excellent maps and solid descriptions at least a lot of places to get it. So again, reinforcing that you can understand Atlanta Campaign a little bit better if you try a little bit harder. Download our Atlanta Campaign battle app and then travel the fields if you can. I'm not seeing. Chris Mackowski is making a movement like he's coming back.
I'm just going to say we're now outside of the outskirts of Atlanta. Johnston's been falling back. There's going to be 10.5 miles of fortifications ringing the city. They're going to extend that to about 12 miles, and that's the only thing protecting this vital rail center at this point. And Sherman is a knocking.
Wrap it up, Chris Mackowski, without any warning.
So we are absolutely having a great time. We've got more to come. We want you to be with us. Gary's going to explore some photographs. We still have the Battle of Atlanta to fight. All that and more coming, but it's made possible by the great work that you have done supporting us. I want to thank Chris White behind the camera doing yeoman's work for us today. I want to thank Charlie, I want to thank Gary, and I want to thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.